Nobody expected Destiny to arrive disguised as a mistake. The Moonrise Festival had always been the brightest night of the year in Blackwood Kingdom, when silver lanterns floated across the sky like drifting stars, and every family gathered beneath the full moon to celebrate peace, hope, and another year beneath its gentle light. Music echoed through the marble streets while children laughed around glowing fountains. Merchants offered sweet pastries dusted with powdered sugar, and royal banners shimmered in the cool evening breeze. Evelyn Carter had spent every festival hidden near the edges of the celebration, quietly helping elderly guests find their seats, carrying baskets of fresh moon lilies, and making herself as invisible as possible. As a young Omega, she had learned long ago that drawing attention often invited whispers she never wanted to hear. Still, she loved this single night each year because, for a few precious hours, everyone looked toward the moon instead of judging one another. She adjusted the simple blue dress she had sewn herself during the winter and smiled politely as she carried another basket toward the palace courtyard. The enormous plaza stood only a few hundred feet away, already crowded with nobles, royal guards, musicians, and visitors from every corner of the kingdom. At the center of it all stood King Adrian Blackwood. Even from a distance, his calm presence seemed to quiet the restless crowd. He wore a black ceremonial coat trimmed with silver thread that reflected the moonlight like flowing water, and although people often described him as the strongest alpha in generations, there was nothing arrogant about the way he greeted his people. He listened before speaking. He smiled before judging. It was one reason so many ordinary citizens quietly admired him. Evelyn had never expected to stand anywhere near the king. Her plan was simple: deliver the flowers, thank the gardeners, and disappear before anyone noticed her. But Destiny rarely asked permission. As the ceremonial bells rang, an unexpected wave of overwhelming emotion swept across the courtyard. The excitement of thousands of voices, the magical energy surrounding the ancient moonrise celebration, and the emotional intensity of the evening caught Evelyn completely by surprise. Her breathing became uneven. Her thoughts blurred for only a heartbeat as she instinctively stepped backward to steady herself. At that exact moment, another guest stumbled into her shoulder. The basket slipped from her hands. White flowers scattered across the polished stone like falling snow. Evelyn lost her balance, reaching out instinctively for anything that could stop her fall. Instead, she found herself colliding with the king. The entire courtyard seemed to freeze. In the confusion, her face brushed against Adrian's shoulder, and in one awkward, completely accidental moment, she instinctively caught herself against the fabric near his neck before immediately pulling away in shock. Silence spread faster than thunder. Thousands of eyes locked onto the impossible scene. A dropped lantern rolled across the marble floor before settling beside the scattered flowers. Evelyn's face turned pale. I'm so sorry," she whispered, barely able to breathe. She lowered her eyes, expecting anger, disappointment, or the command every frightened rumor had warned about since childhood. Around them, nobles exchanged stunned glances. Several royal guards instinctively stepped forward before hesitating, uncertain whether to intervene. Even the musicians had stopped playing. The only sound remaining was the soft whisper of the evening wind moving through the palace banners. Adrian remained perfectly still for a long moment. Then, instead of stepping away, he calmly looked at the trembling young woman standing before him. His silver eyes carried curiosity rather than judgment. He noticed the scattered flowers first. Then he noticed her shaking hands. Finally, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, so unexpected that even his closest advisors blinked in disbelief. "Well," he said with a quiet warmth that carried effortlessly across the silent courtyard, "you're certainly my little disaster." A few people gasped. Others stared as though they had misheard the king himself. Evelyn slowly lifted her eyes, unable to understand what had just happened. There was no anger in his voice, no humiliation, no accusation, only gentle amusement and an unexpected kindness that seemed completely out of place after such an embarrassing accident. The tension across the plaza shifted, but confusion quickly replaced fear. Why had the Alpha King reacted that way? Why had he protected her dignity instead of condemning her? Questions spread through the gathering faster than the evening breeze, yet Adrian offered no explanation. He simply bent down, picked up one of the white moon lilies from the marble floor, brushed away a speck of dust, and carefully placed it back into Evelyn's trembling hands. For the first time that night, she looked directly into his eyes, and neither of them realized that one impossible accident had quietly begun changing the future of an entire kingdom. The silence lingering over the royal courtyard refused to disappear even after the music cautiously returned. Conversations resumed only in hushed whispers as every noble, merchant, and visitor tried to understand what they had just witnessed. Evelyn Carter remained frozen where she stood, clutching the white moon lily that King Adrian Blackwood had quietly returned to her hands. Her heart still raced with embarrassment, and every instinct urged her to apologize once more before disappearing into the crowd forever. Instead, she lowered her gaze and stepped backward, hoping the sea of people would swallow her before anyone decided she deserved punishment after all. Yet she had barely taken 3 careful steps when one of the senior royal advisors approached Adrian with visible concern. The older man leaned forward respectfully and spoke in a voice meant to remain private, but the unusually quiet courtyard allowed fragments of his words to drift through the air. He questioned whether the unexpected incident should be investigated according to long-standing royal customs. Several nearby nobles nodded in agreement, their expressions revealing more curiosity than compassion. Rumors had always spread quickly inside Blackwood Kingdom, and tonight promised to become the greatest source of gossip in years. Adrian listened patiently without interrupting. When the advisor finished speaking, the Alpha King calmly looked toward Evelyn again. She was standing near the edge of the marble staircase now, nervously smoothing the fabric of her blue dress while trying to avoid every curious stare surrounding her. Adrian could clearly see that she was preparing herself for blame she did not deserve. He slowly turned back toward the advisor. "It was an accident," he said with steady confidence. "Nothing more." His words carried across the courtyard with surprising ease. There was no uncertainty in his voice, and because of that, no one immediately challenged him. One by one, the royal guards relaxed their posture. Several musicians exchanged relieved smiles before cautiously resuming the gentle melody that had been interrupted moments earlier. The tension did not disappear completely, but it softened enough for the celebration to breathe again. Evelyn could hardly believe what she had heard. He had protected her twice in less than 5 minutes. She quietly bowed toward the king from a respectful distance before hurrying toward one of the palace garden paths. She never noticed Adrian, watching to make sure she reached the quieter section of the grounds safely before returning his attention to the waiting guests. Throughout the remainder of the evening, whispers followed both of them like drifting autumn leaves. Some people insisted the king had simply shown extraordinary kindness. Others believed there had to be a deeper reason. A few older citizens exchanged thoughtful glances after remembering forgotten stories told by grandparents about unusual meetings beneath the full moon. None of them claimed certainty, yet the questions continued multiplying with every passing minute. Evelyn eventually found herself beside the peaceful fountain behind the eastern greenhouse, where the festival lights appeared softer and the crowds sounded comfortably distant. She knelt to gather herself, taking a slow breath as moonlight shimmered across the quiet water. "You are trembling," an elderly voice observed gently. Evelyn looked up to see Miriam Ashcroft approaching with measured steps. The respected scholar and royal historian carried a small lantern that illuminated her warm smile rather than the darkness around her. "Everyone keeps looking at me," Evelyn admitted softly. "I did not mean for any of this to happen." Miriam nodded with understanding instead of surprise. "Life rarely announces its important moments before they arrive," she replied. "Sometimes the smallest accident asks the biggest question." Evelyn frowned slightly, uncertain what those words truly meant. Before she could ask, distant laughter drifted from the palace gardens as fireworks painted silver patterns across the night sky. The celebration continued, but somehow it no longer felt like the same festival that had begun only an hour earlier. Across the courtyard, Adrian stood alone on the palace balcony for a brief moment after greeting another delegation of guests. His closest captain quietly approached him with an apologetic expression. "Your Majesty," the captain said carefully, "the council wishes to know whether the young woman should be questioned tomorrow." Adrian looked toward the eastern gardens where Evelyn had disappeared among the moonlit flowers. A thoughtful smile briefly returned to his face. No, he answered without hesitation. She has already worried enough for one evening. The captain bowed respectfully before leaving. Adrian remained on the balcony a little longer than anyone expected, watching the lanterns drift higher into the clear night sky. He could not explain why his thoughts continued returning to the frightened young woman with the basket of white flowers. He only knew that when she had looked at him with genuine regret, instead of fear for herself, something about her honesty had quietly stayed with him. Far below, Evelyn finally gathered the courage to stand and continue helping the festival volunteers clean the gardens as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet every time she reached for another fallen moon lily, she remembered the king's gentle smile and the impossible nickname that still echoed in her thoughts. She had expected the most humiliating night of her life. Instead, she walked home beneath the glowing moon carrying questions that neither she nor anyone else in Blackwood Kingdom could yet answer. Morning sunlight spread across Blackwood Citadel with a quiet warmth that made the Grand Palace seem almost ordinary after the unforgettable events of the Moonrise Festival. Yet beneath the peaceful sky, whispers traveled through every hallway, garden, and marketplace faster than the morning breeze. Servants paused while arranging breakfast tables, merchants lowered their voices behind colorful market stalls, and even the royal guards exchanged curious glances whenever the previous evening was mentioned. No one seemed interested in the scattered moon lilies anymore. Everyone wanted to understand why their Alpha King had shown such unexpected kindness to an unknown Omega. Evelyn Carter wished she could pretend none of it had ever happened. She spent the first hours of the morning helping the palace gardeners gather fresh herbs and flowers for the royal kitchens, hoping that simple work would quiet her restless thoughts. Every time someone looked in her direction, she wondered whether they recognized her from the festival. Some offered polite smiles. Others whispered behind raised hands before quickly looking away. She kept reminding herself that once the excitement faded, life would surely return to normal. As she finished arranging another basket of flowers, an elderly steward wearing the silver crest of the royal household approached with measured steps. His expression remained calm and respectful. "Miss Carter," he said with a courteous bow, "His Majesty requests your presence at the East residence this afternoon." Evelyn blinked in complete surprise. For a brief moment, she wondered whether she had misunderstood his words. "The East residence?" she repeated quietly. The steward nodded. "You are not in trouble. His Majesty simply wishes to speak with you." Before she could ask another question, he offered a reassuring smile and continued along the garden path, leaving Evelyn standing among the blooming moon lilies with 1,000 new worries racing through her mind. By early afternoon, she found herself walking toward the quieter eastern wing of the palace, an area reserved for the king's private library, peaceful gardens, and smaller meeting rooms far removed from the busy royal court. The atmosphere felt entirely different from the grand ceremonial halls. Songbirds rested among flowering trees, fountains flowed gently across polished stone, and ivy climbed the pale marble walls beneath tall, arched windows. It was beautiful in a quiet, welcoming way that somehow eased her nervous breathing. A palace attendant opened an elegant wooden door and invited her inside. The room beyond was filled with warm sunlight pouring across towering bookshelves and carefully arranged maps spread across a polished oak table. Adrian Blackwood stood near the open window, reading an aged leather-bound volume before closing it as she entered. He greeted her with the same calm expression she remembered from the night before. "Thank you for coming," he said warmly. Evelyn immediately lowered her head respectfully. "Your Majesty, I wanted to apologize again for what happened." Adrian smiled with quiet amusement. "You have apologized enough times to cover an entire year." Evelyn hesitated before allowing herself a small, embarrassed smile. The tension between them softened almost immediately. Adrian walked toward a nearby table where 2 cups of freshly brewed herbal tea had already been prepared. "Please," he said, gesturing toward the chair opposite his own. "Sit. I would rather have a conversation than watch you worry." She carefully accepted the invitation, sitting with perfect posture while trying not to appear overwhelmed by the elegant surroundings. For several moments, they simply enjoyed the peaceful silence. Through the open windows, they could hear distant birds singing and the gentle sound of water flowing through the royal gardens. Finally, Adrian spoke again. "You enjoy caring for flowers." Evelyn looked surprised by the observation before nodding. They remind me that even quiet things can make an entire place feel alive. Adrian considered her answer thoughtfully. That explains why the gardens always seem brighter after you have been there. The unexpected compliment caught her completely off guard. Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment, and she quickly looked down at her teacup. "You are very kind, Your Majesty." Adrian leaned back comfortably, studying her expression with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Every answer she gave sounded sincere. Every smile appeared unforced. She seemed completely unaware of how naturally she brought peace into the room around her. It was a quality he had rarely encountered inside palace walls. Before either of them realized how much time had passed, the afternoon sunlight had shifted across the library floor. As Evelyn prepared to leave, Adrian stood and walked her to the doorway. "The East residence is always open to you," he said. "If you ever wish to read, tend the gardens, or simply enjoy a quiet afternoon, you will be welcome here." Evelyn looked at him with sincere gratitude, still unable to understand why the king continued showing her such extraordinary generosity. She offered a graceful bow before stepping into the sunlit corridor. As she walked through the peaceful gardens toward the palace gates, she noticed something she had not felt since before the festival began. The fear inside her heart had grown noticeably smaller, replaced by a quiet sense that her life had begun turning toward a future she could not yet imagine. While from the library window, Adrian watched her disappear among the blooming moon lilies, wondering why every conversation with the gentle young Omega left the East residence feeling a little less empty than before. The following morning arrived with a gentle layer of mist resting over the eastern gardens, transforming every path, fountain, and flowering tree into something that looked almost dreamlike beneath the early sunlight. What had begun as a single unexpected invitation slowly became part of Evelyn Carter's routine. She no longer entered the East residence with the same overwhelming fear that had filled her heart only days before. Instead, she arrived quietly after finishing her morning work in the palace gardens, carrying fresh moon lilies or a basket of herbs that the royal kitchen no longer needed. Every visit remained simple, yet somehow every conversation lingered in her thoughts long after she returned home. Adrian Blackwood noticed the change as well. The young Omega who had once struggled to meet his eyes now greeted him with a sincere smile, before carefully arranging flowers near the library windows or watering the climbing vines that surrounded the courtyard fountain. She never tried to impress anyone. She simply treated every living thing with the same quiet kindness. One afternoon, Adrian found her gently repairing the broken wooden handle of an old watering can instead of requesting a replacement from the palace workshop. Curious, he walked closer and asked why she had not simply asked for a new one. Evelyn smiled softly without looking up from her work. "Because it still has many good years left if someone is willing to care for it." Adrian studied the worn tool before quietly laughing. "You seem to believe everything deserves another chance." She finally looked toward him, her bright blue eyes reflecting the afternoon sunlight. "Sometimes people only need someone to notice what is still worth saving." Her answer stayed with him for the rest of the day. During the following week, their paths crossed naturally again and again. Some afternoons they read ancient books in comfortable silence while rain tapped gently against the library windows. Other days they walked through the royal gardens discussing flowers, birds, and the history of the kingdom instead of politics or royal ceremonies. Evelyn listened with genuine curiosity whenever Adrian described the responsibility of protecting thousands of families. Adrian discovered that Evelyn possessed an unexpected understanding of ordinary people because she spent her life quietly helping them without expecting recognition. The distance that had once separated a king and a humble Omega slowly disappeared, replaced by an easy friendship built through countless ordinary moments. Even the palace staff began noticing the subtle change inside the East residence. The library, once known as the quietest place in the palace, now occasionally echoed with gentle laughter whenever Adrian unsuccessfully attempted to identify the names of rare garden flowers. Evelyn patiently corrected him every single time, and each mistake seemed to amuse him more than the last. One elderly servant whispered to another that the Eastern Wing had not felt so full of life in many years. Yet outside those peaceful walls, the whispers throughout the kingdom continued growing louder. Several influential nobles questioned why the king spent increasing amounts of time with an Omega whose only reputation had been kindness. Some insisted it was merely gratitude after the festival incident. Others believed there had to be a reason hidden beneath the king's unusual interest. None of them possessed evidence, but uncertainty often encouraged imagination far more than truth. One evening, after another quiet afternoon inside the library, Evelyn prepared to leave before sunset. As she reached the entrance, she suddenly paused. Without warning, an unfamiliar feeling passed through her heart, gentle but impossible to ignore, almost as though someone nearby had quietly sighed with relief. She turned around instinctively. Across the room, Adrian had just finished reading an official letter that had clearly weighed heavily on his mind. Although he remained composed, his expression had noticeably softened at the exact same moment she experienced the strange feeling. Their eyes met across the room. Neither of them spoke. Neither understood why that brief, silent glance felt unexpectedly familiar. Adrian slowly folded the letter and offered a reassuring smile. Evelyn smiled back almost automatically before stepping into the golden evening light. She walked through the palace gardens wondering why she had sensed an emotion that did not seem entirely her own. From the library window, Adrian watched the young woman disappear beneath the flowering trees, quietly surprised that the room always seemed brighter while she was there and noticeably quieter after she left. Somewhere deep within the oldest halls of Blackwood Citadel, hidden among forgotten shelves untouched for generations, an ancient volume resting beneath layers of dust shifted open ever so slightly, revealing the faded silver symbol of a moon bond that history believed had vanished centuries before. Several peaceful days passed, and the quiet rhythm of life inside the East residence continued almost unchanged, yet something invisible had begun weaving itself between Evelyn Carter and Adrian Blackwood. Neither of them spoke about it because neither could explain it. It revealed itself only through small moments that were easy to dismiss as coincidence. One crisp morning, Evelyn paused while arranging fresh moon lilies outside the library window, suddenly smiling without knowing why. Moments later, Adrian emerged from the library carrying a stack of reports, looking noticeably lighter than he had only minutes earlier after receiving encouraging news from one of the kingdom's farming villages. On another afternoon, Adrian found himself glancing toward the gardens with unexpected concern, sensing that something felt slightly unsettled. When he stepped outside, he discovered Evelyn struggling to protect a row of delicate flowers from an approaching rainstorm. She looked up in surprise as he quietly joined her, helping cover the fragile plants before the first drops reached them. Neither questioned how he had known where to find her. The strange connection continued growing stronger in ways too subtle for anyone else to notice. If Evelyn laughed while speaking with the palace children, Adrian often caught himself smiling during council meetings without realizing why. If Adrian spent a long morning carrying the weight of difficult royal decisions, Evelyn sometimes found herself feeling unexpectedly thoughtful even while tending the peaceful gardens. The emotions never overwhelmed them, but they appeared often enough to leave both quietly wondering whether destiny could truly whisper instead of shout. One evening, after finishing another day in the East residence, Adrian visited the oldest wing of the royal library searching for historical records connected to forgotten traditions. He had begun asking questions that he could not fully explain, and every answer seemed to point toward stories that most scholars dismissed as beautiful legends rather than history. Dust rested thick upon towering shelves that had not been disturbed in generations. Ancient candles cast warm golden light across faded leather bindings and weathered wooden tables. As Adrian carefully examined one forgotten volume after another, he heard slow footsteps approaching behind him. Miriam Ashcroft entered the chamber carrying a lantern whose gentle glow illuminated her thoughtful expression. She looked at the collection of books surrounding the king before quietly asking, "What is it that you hope to find?" Adrian hesitated before answering honestly, "Something that explains why ordinary moments no longer feel ordinary." Miriam studied him for a long moment before reaching toward one of the highest shelves. With surprising familiarity, she removed an aged silver-blue volume covered in faded moon symbols. Carefully placing it upon the table, she opened the brittle pages until an intricate illustration appeared beneath the candlelight. Two figures stood beneath an ancient white oak while a delicate silver pattern connected them like flowing moonlight. Adrian looked down at the illustration in thoughtful silence. I have seen this symbol before, he admitted. Miriam nodded gently. Very few people have. The old records call it the moon bond. Adrian looked up with quiet curiosity. I thought that was only a story. Many stories survive because someone forgets they began as truth, Miriam replied softly. She slowly turned another page, revealing handwritten notes preserved across centuries. According to these chronicles, a moon bond cannot be created through power, status, or ambition. It appears only when two hearts reveal extraordinary kindness at exactly the moment destiny requires it. Those connected often begin by sharing quiet emotions before either of them understands what is happening. Adrian remained silent as her words settled into the stillness surrounding them. They sounded impossible, yet they described every unexplained feeling he had experienced since the Moonrise Festival with unsettling accuracy. Across the palace gardens, completely unaware of the conversation unfolding inside the ancient library, Evelyn paused beneath the evening sky while watering the final row of moon lilies. She suddenly felt a gentle wave of calm pass through her heart, accompanied by an unexpected certainty that someone important had just found an answer they had been seeking. She looked toward the glowing windows of the East residence without knowing why. At that exact moment, Adrian quietly closed the ancient chronicle, his eyes lingering upon the silver symbol before him. Miriam carefully folded her hands and spoke one final sentence that echoed through the silent chamber. If the moon bond has truly awakened after all these centuries, Your Majesty, then history is not repeating itself. It is beginning a brand new chapter. Adrian slowly turned his gaze toward the moonlit gardens beyond the library windows where countless white flowers swayed peacefully beneath the evening breeze, realizing that the accidental meeting everyone had dismissed as simple chance might have been the first page of a story far older than either of them had ever imagined. The news spread across Blackwood Kingdom long before the official council gathering began. By sunrise, every noble household had already formed an opinion about the mysterious Omega who now spent her afternoons inside the East residence. Some called it harmless kindness. Others quietly questioned whether tradition itself was beginning to change. The great council assembled beneath the towering crystal dome of the royal hall, where generations of rulers had debated the future of the kingdom. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows, painting silver and blue patterns across the polished marble floor. Adrian Blackwood entered with his usual calm confidence, greeting each council member with respect before taking his place. The discussion began with trade routes and harvest reports, but it did not remain there for long. One senior noble slowly stood and respectfully addressed the king. He spoke carefully, praising Adrian's wisdom before expressing concern that the growing rumors surrounding the young Omega were distracting the kingdom. Another advisor quietly agreed, suggesting that the simplest solution would be creating more distance between the king and Evelyn Carter so unnecessary speculation could finally disappear. The room remained perfectly silent as every council member waited for Adrian's response. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he allowed the silence to settle, studying every face around the chamber before. Speaking with the same calm voice that had earned the trust of his people. A kingdom becomes stronger when it judges people by their character rather than by assumptions, he said. Miss Carter has shown nothing except kindness, honesty, and respect toward everyone she has met. I will not allow unfounded rumors to become the measure of another person's worth. His words echoed through the vast hall with quiet authority. No anger colored his voice, yet no uncertainty remained either. Several council members exchanged thoughtful glances, realizing that the king had made his position unmistakably clear. The discussion gradually shifted toward other matters, but everyone present understood that something important had changed. Later that afternoon, Evelyn continued tending the moon lily garden, completely unaware of the conversation that had taken place inside the council chamber. She carefully trimmed faded blossoms and replaced them with fresh blooms while humming a gentle melody she remembered from childhood. The peaceful rhythm of the garden always helped quiet her thoughts. As she finished arranging the final row of flowers, Adrian appeared along the stone pathway carrying no royal documents, no ceremonial escort, and no visible sign of the demanding mourning he had just experienced. He simply walked beside her as though visiting the gardens had become the most natural part of his day. Evelyn greeted him with a warm smile. "I hope your meetings went well, Your Majesty." Adrian looked at the newly blooming flowers before answering. "They became easier after I remembered something important." She tilted her head with quiet curiosity. "And what was that?" He glanced toward the garden she had patiently transformed over the past several weeks. "Good things deserve protection while they are still growing." Evelyn smiled gently, believing he was speaking only about the flowers surrounding them. Adrian knew he meant far more than that. As the afternoon sunlight settled across the peaceful garden, Miriam Ashcroft watched from a nearby balcony with the Ancient Moon Chronicles resting quietly in her hands. The silver emblem on its weathered cover caught the light for only a brief moment before she softly closed the book again. She no longer questioned whether destiny had begun moving through Blackwood Kingdom. She only wondered how soon the rest of the kingdom would recognize what the moon had already quietly revealed beneath its ancient light. The peaceful rhythm that had settled over the East residence soon gave way to a quiet sense of anticipation, as though the kingdom itself was waiting for an answer that had remained hidden for generations. Miriam Ashcroft spent the following days inside the oldest archive beneath Blackwood Citadel, carefully comparing faded journals, royal records, and forgotten moon chronicles preserved long before Adrian Blackwood had been born. Hour after hour, she traced ancient symbols, translated weathered passages, and matched family histories that few scholars had ever bothered to study. At last, just before sunset on the third evening, she closed the final volume with a gentle smile that carried both relief and wonder. The missing pieces had finally come together. She requested a private meeting with the king inside the Eastern Library, where warm golden light stretched across the polished wooden floor while the last rays of the afternoon sun filtered through tall, stained glass windows. Adrian arrived quietly, recognizing the thoughtful expression on Miriam's face before she spoke a single word. Without unnecessary ceremony, she opened the oldest chronicle to a carefully marked page. The illustration showed two figures standing beneath the branches of an ancient white oak, while delicate streams of silver light connected them beneath a full moon. "Your Majesty," Miriam began softly, "I believe the chronicles were never describing power. They were describing character." Adrian studied the faded illustration in silence. Miriam continued turning several pages until handwritten notes from centuries earlier became visible. Every confirmed moon bond recorded in our history shared one remarkable truth. The connection never appeared because of status, strength, or noble blood. It awakened only when two people consistently chose compassion over pride, kindness over fear, and humility over recognition. Adrian slowly looked up from the ancient pages. The explanation matched everything he had witnessed since the Moonrise Festival. Evelyn Carter had never sought attention, influence, or reward. Every decision she made reflected quiet generosity, whether she was repairing old tools, tending flowers, helping strangers, or offering encouragement without expecting anything in return. Miriam smiled gently as though she had reached the same conclusion long before speaking it aloud. The chronicles described the moon bond as destiny recognizing two hearts that already belonged to the same path. Adrian remained thoughtful for several moments before closing the ancient book with careful hands. "Then nothing began on the night of the festival," he said quietly. "That evening simply revealed what had already existed." Miriam nodded with quiet satisfaction. "Exactly." At that same moment, Evelyn wandered through the western gardens carrying a basket filled with fresh moon lilies for the palace chapel. The evening breeze moved gently through the blooming flowers while golden sunlight painted the stone pathways with warm color. She suddenly paused beneath the ancient white oak without understanding why she had chosen that particular place to rest. A peaceful feeling settled over her heart, stronger than anything she had experienced before, as though the entire garden had become unusually calm. She closed her eyes for only a moment and smiled, unaware that Adrian, standing at the Eastern Library window nearly 300 feet away, had instinctively looked toward the very same tree at precisely the same time. Neither of them could see the other through the branches, yet both shared the same quiet certainty that everything somehow felt exactly as it should. The following morning, Adrian requested that a gathering be arranged beneath the ancient white oak for members of the royal household, senior advisors, and respected citizens of the kingdom. No explanation accompanied the invitation, but the unusual request quickly spread throughout Blackwood Citadel. Some expected an important royal announcement. Others believed the king intended to settle the rumors once and for all. Only Miriam understood the true reason for the gathering. As she carefully returned the Moon Chronicles to their protected shelf, she looked toward the rising moon visible beyond the library windows and whispered with quiet confidence that history was not asking the kingdom to remember an old legend. It was inviting everyone to witness the beginning of a new one. The ancient white oak stood at the heart of Blackwood Citadel exactly as it had for centuries, its enormous silver branches stretching across the morning sky, while countless moon lilies bloomed beneath its shade. Long before the appointed hour, nobles, palace servants, royal guards, scholars, and respected citizens quietly gathered around the stone courtyard, each carrying a different expectation for why the Alpha King had called such an unusual assembly. Soft conversations drifted through the crowd before gradually fading into silence as Adrian Blackwood approached beneath the warm morning sunlight. He wore no ceremonial crown, only his familiar black royal coat that reflected quiet confidence rather than grandeur. Miriam Ashcroft stood nearby with the ancient Moon Chronicles resting carefully in her hands, while Evelyn Carter remained respectfully toward the back of the gathering, believing she had simply been invited as another witness. She had no idea that the entire morning would soon change her life forever. Adrian greeted those assembled with calm dignity before turning toward Miriam. Without unnecessary ceremony, she opened the weathered chronicle to the page that had remained hidden for generations. Her steady voice carried clearly across the peaceful courtyard. She spoke of forgotten history, of the moon bond described not as a reward for power or noble birth, but as a rare recognition of compassion, humility, and unwavering kindness shared between two people. As the crowd listened, expressions slowly shifted from curiosity to thoughtful reflection. Many had expected ancient legends. Instead, they heard values that every ordinary person could understand. Miriam then closed the chronicle and looked toward Adrian with a quiet nod, signaling that the truth now belonged in the present rather than the past. Adrian stepped forward and allowed a brief silence to settle beneath the ancient branches. Finally, he turned toward Evelyn. She looked surprised when he gently motioned for her to join him beneath the white oak. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked across the stone pathway, uncertain why so many eyes were now following her. When she reached his side, she lowered her gaze respectfully, still believing she did not belong in such an important place. Adrian smiled with the same calm kindness that had first surprised her during the Moonrise Festival. Then, before the gathered crowd, he spoke with quiet certainty. The strength of this kingdom has never come from titles alone. It comes from the character of the people who choose kindness even when no one is watching. His eyes briefly met Evelyn's before he continued. Miss Evelyn Carter has reminded me that humility can stand beside courage, and compassion can quietly change lives without asking for recognition. The courtyard remained completely still. No dramatic proclamation followed. No elaborate ceremony interrupted the moment. Adrian simply remained beside Evelyn, making it unmistakably clear through his presence that she deserved the same respect offered to anyone else standing beneath the ancient tree. One by one, the people gathered around them began lowering their heads in quiet acknowledgement. Several nobles who had once questioned her looked toward her with expressions softened by understanding rather than suspicion. Palace servants smiled openly. The royal guard stood proudly without hesitation. Evelyn slowly lifted her eyes, overwhelmed not by attention but by acceptance she had never expected to receive. She realized that no one was looking at her with judgment anymore. They were simply seeing her as she truly was. Above them, a gentle breeze carried white flower petals through the branches of the ancient oak while warm sunlight filtered across the courtyard, bathing everyone beneath the same golden light. Miriam quietly closed the Moon Chronicles with peaceful satisfaction. History had not repeated itself through spectacle or extraordinary displays. It had fulfilled itself through simple truth. As Adrian and Evelyn stood together beneath the ancient tree, Blackwood Kingdom witnessed something far greater than an old legend. It witnessed the moment when compassion became stronger than prejudice. And from that morning forward, the story people remembered was no longer about an unexpected accident during a festival. It became the story of how one quiet act of kindness changed the heart of an entire kingdom. Several months passed, and life inside Blackwood Kingdom settled into a peaceful rhythm unlike anything its people had experienced in years. The whispers that had once followed Evelyn Carter through every hallway and garden slowly disappeared, replaced by warm greetings and genuine smiles wherever she walked. She continued caring for the Moon Lily Gardens, helping palace servants, comforting children, and quietly repairing anything that had been forgotten or neglected. Nothing about her kindness had changed after gaining the respect of the kingdom. If anything, she became even more determined to remind others that true compassion was shown through everyday actions rather than grand speeches. Adrian Blackwood often found himself joining her during quiet afternoons in the Eastern Gardens after completing his royal duties. Sometimes they walked beneath the ancient white oak without saying a single word because silence between them had become as comfortable as conversation. Other afternoons they read together inside the peaceful library while sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, or they watched the palace gardeners prepare new rows of blooming moon lilies for another season. The unusual connection that had once confused them no longer felt mysterious. It simply became a natural part of their lives, quietly reminding each of them that they never carried joy or responsibility alone. Miriam Ashcroft occasionally smiled whenever she saw them together, knowing the oldest Moon Chronicles had not simply predicted destiny, but celebrated the kind of people willing to shape it through kindness. The ancient volume remained carefully preserved inside the royal library, yet no one needed to open its pages very often anymore. The greatest lesson it contained could now be seen walking through the gardens every day. Visitors from neighboring kingdoms began noticing something different whenever they entered Blackwood Citadel. They expected to find strength in towering walls and disciplined royal guards, but instead they discovered a kingdom where respect was offered freely regardless of status, where palace servants spoke without fear, where children laughed openly beneath the ancient white oak, and where a king measured greatness by character rather than appearance or title. Slowly, those values spread beyond the palace walls into villages, farms, and distant towns until the story became part of everyday life. Years later, when families gathered beneath the full moon during the Moonrise Festival, children no longer remembered the evening because of an unexpected accident. They remembered it because it marked the beginning of a friendship built on trust, a partnership strengthened by compassion, and a future shaped by understanding instead of prejudice. Whenever someone asked Adrian how everything had started, he would simply glance toward Evelyn with the same gentle smile that had surprised an entire kingdom on that unforgettable night. "There is my little disaster," he would say with quiet affection, and Evelyn would laugh softly, knowing the words no longer described embarrassment. They had become a reminder that even the most unexpected moments could lead to the greatest blessings when people chose kindness over judgment. Beneath the silver branches of the ancient white oak, surrounded by blooming moon lilies and the peaceful kingdom they had helped transform, both of them understood that destiny had never been about perfection. It had always been about finding the courage to see the goodness in another heart before anyone else did. And perhaps that is the greatest kind of strength any kingdom can ever possess. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share it with someone who believes kindness can change a life. Tell us in the comments, if you had been standing in the courtyard that unforgettable night, what would your first reaction have been? And do you believe destiny sometimes begins with the smallest unexpected moment?